Time to rev up those carabiners because after 15 years of the old N280, there is a new generation Toyota 4Runner in town. This is the new 2025 Toyota 4Runner, the new N500 generation, running an all-new platform shared with a bunch of really impressive new models and an all-new powertrain that, love it or hate it, brings a whole lot more power. This new 4Runner drives like none ever before. We've spent a good bit of time with this thing on the road so far this week, but today I really want to take this 4Runner TRD Pro out where it belongs, on the trail, on the moguls, and in the fun stuff. With that, let's hit the trails. Well, okay, perhaps trail is a bit unrepresentative because, you see, the TRD Pro here is now one of two Halo flagship models. This is the 2025 4Runner, and Toyota sees that people like to off-road differently nowadays. So, right out the gate, before you get into anything, you've got to understand that there are two kings of the off-road work here in the 4Runner lineup now, as in the tacos. This is the TRD Pro, this is the nameplate we all know and love, but it's answering now a little bit more of a playful, raptorized vision of off-roading. By contrast, Toyota is now also offering a trail hunter trim for both the Taco and the 4Runner. That thing is a little bit more slow, plodding, methodical, overlanding oriented, whereas this is here ready to smack, bang, and bounce all day long. With that, let's get smack banging and bouncing. So, 2025 4Runner, we've known about it for a little while, but what's actually new? Well, the big news is that we're on a new platform. We've tested this platform in other vehicles, the new Toyota Tenga F layout. That's used under the new Tacoma, the Sequoia, the Tundra, the 4Runner here, and the new L250 Land Cruiser Prados. And then, of course, under all of the Lexus models that go with those. And really, this new platform is the key to understanding these new products, because it's not just that they've updated things and given it more driver assistant technology. They've done all that, of course. But what really matters about these is that the new Tenga F platform is sturdier than ever before. And that's not just marketing speak. This is actually credible because they've moved from a classic C-channel ladder frame under all of these trucks. Now it's fully boxed. That means that instead of just having a three-sided rail across each side, the fourth side is now closed in. That gives it a lot more rigidity under torsional loads that would have made the past rigs twist and bend as they undulated over moguls and other obstacles. That also means that if you're just running this on the road, it's a lot less hop-skippy and a lot more stable and predictable. If you remember the old Tacoma, where those things would always sort of hop around, feel really loosey-goosey, that character in all of these models is gone now, and to great effect, because between that and other suspension improvements, these new trucks ride so beautifully. This is now a modern vehicle. The old trucks, well, they were feeling long in the tooth, but that's gone now. And what else is gone? Well, the old powertrain. Now, a lot of people really liked the old powertrain. It was a 4-liter V6 in these things at the end, and it put out not a lot of horsepower, if a whole lot of noise. That powertrain, well, it was sturdy, it lasted forever. That was a bulletproof setup. And that characteristic whoosh of that belt-driven cooling fan firing up every time you started the truck, well, that is a charming bit of character that we've lost. But nowadays, it's a modern setup. This new truck runs a new T24A engine. It's a turbocharged 2.4-liter inline-4, and in these top-of-the-line models, like the TRD Pro, it's now hybridized. Now, be not afraid, because that comes with two big perks that I want to get to before I talk about anything else. We have seen now over the years that the Toyota Prius is consistently one of the most reliable vehicles on sale and that has been sold because, in part, a trusty hybrid system helps to ease the load on the engine. Here, we're using basically the same Prius architecture to hybridize. We've got a 48 horsepower motor that helps things along and gives you more torque off the line. But more importantly, it also contributes to just really big power figures all around. Here, we're looking at 326 horsepower, 465 pound-feet of torque. That's, of course, running to all four wheels, although in these models it is selectable either 2 or 4. That runs through a 2-speed transfer case and an 8-speed automatic transmission. You can't get a manual in these, unfortunately, though you can still in the Tacos. What's that like in the boring stuff? Well, fuel economy figures are all around 9 and 10. That's actually pretty respectable for something like this, though I must admit I have generally been running something a little more toward the 12s because it's a lot of fun. You see, this isn't necessarily so much an efficiency powertrain. Indeed, it only gets 1 to 2 liters per 100 better in each of the stats than the regular gas version. No, it's really just more about torque, power, and particularly infill. You see, whereas there's no real shortage necessarily of power in the regular gas engine down low, this thing makes sure of it by bringing that electric torque right from the start. Then once the turbocharging kicks in, you've got that much more. That makes this truck, just as the Sequoia and others on this platform, really surprisingly fast in hybrid guise. Running it on the trail or just on the highway, merging, accelerating from stops, all of it is surprisingly fun now. And that's not something that you ever really would have expected of a 4Runner. The old things lumbered, they were slow, and they were noisy while they did it. This is quiet, at least from up front, and relatively sedate, just sort of cruising along and pulling all you like without much thought. That said, you do get some noise from out back because Toyota has fitted these TRD Pros with a catback exhaust. That means everything after the catalytic converter has been changed out. And the result is a throatier, burblier sound. It's really satisfying, and especially when you roll that rear window down, as you still can do ever so importantly here in the 4Runner, well, you get even more of that sound coming into the cabin. It's just pleasant. It gives it a feeling that there's something worthwhile going on. This doesn't feel like a gutless little 4-cylinder. And that's a big comfort, especially for those traditionalists who are worried that hybridizing this powertrain was going to neuter the character of the truck, make it soft, make it soy, what have you. No, this is still serious, and indeed it's more serious than before. Of course, underneath, we've got those chassis improvements, that improved, stiffer ladder frame. We've also got other thoughtful bits of beef, like the trailer hitch receiver. It's still a class 4, and it's only actually rated in this thing to pull 6,000 pounds. But if you're using it for recovery, for instance, it's a solid unit. You actually can't use regular hitch pins in these things anymore. You've got to use one that's about an inch longer. And then, thanks to welded plates on the front and back that bind it all together, you've just got a lot more durability on basically all axes if you're using that with an appropriate recovery hitch. That said, we do have a trailer brake controller right here next to the steering wheel, which is always nice to see, especially in a truck that costs this much. You're not really using this for towing, though. You're using this for the everyday, let's be real. Yes, people love the idea of running around the trails in their off-roaders, but we know that most of these nowadays are just used for tech bro cosplay. You know what? That's just as well, because the more rich tech bros that buy these things and option them up, the more of them will still be around in 20 years when people like me on journo salaries or what have you can finally afford to buy them and beat them around now that they're tired, old, and worthless. Although, these probably won't fall worthless because these Toyota off-roaders just have a really annoying tendency of holding their value. So what else has Toyota serioused up in these things? Well, underneath, we've replaced the flimsy old front aluminum skid plate with a solid, roughly 1/4 inch thick piece that runs the whole way back past the engine. It's got 2 large eyelets too, which are really nice if you're doing your own oil changes because you can undo all of the fasteners and it'll stay in place until you scoot it to the side. That's a nice touch, it's considerate. Armor continues underneath the transfer case where there's a little steel plate, as well as underneath the sway bar disconnect and a steel plate protecting the fuel tank. There isn't something underneath the transmission sump, which is a little surprising, although Toyota has done the classic Taco 4Runner thing here, and they've tucked it really high up between the frame rails, so you should hypothetically, ideally stay clear as long as you don't have a surprise rock in the middle of whatever you're crossing over. Now, as you cross over, that breakover angle is 24 degrees. That is the same as the departure angle, although the approach is a pretty solid 32. That's thanks to the predictable lift that you get on this thing to make sure that you're able to get over stuff. That clearance is also assured by the continued absence of running boards, and good riddance, because running boards are the worst. Yes, they're useful for short people because obviously it makes it easier to get in, but if you're doing stuff like this, it's really easy to get running boards caught up on things. Now, don't forget though that that's different from something else that I do wish this had, which are rock sliders. This does not have sill protection rails, and that is a bit of an odd omission. Now, if you get the Trail Hunter, that does fit them because it's meant for more technical crawling, whereas this is meant really for Baja blasting and just goofing off like I'm doing right here. To that end, this fits different shocks than the ARB Old Man Emu setup that you get there in the Trail Hunter. Here, you get the TRD Classic. These are Fox dampers. Now, they combine with coil springs front and rear. We've got independent double wishbones up front with forged aluminum upper control arms and, in a nice touch, aluminum spindles just to ease that unsprung mass that much more, making it more reliable off-road as well as more manageable on the road. Out back, we've still got a proper solid beam axle as well for solid articulation. To match that articulation, we've got a sway bar disconnect up front. This actually replaces an old system, which was Toyota's KDSS system, which basically used hydraulic links crisscrossing the car to detect when it needed extra extension at low speeds and to release things so that you could reach those tires down and keep the grip moving things along. Even a Baja blaster needs a little bit more precision every now and then though. So you can, of course, slow this thing down. We've got selectable 2 high, 4 high, and 4 low down here. And well, it's not a classic mechanical control like I personally would like. It is in a very intuitive place now, as are all of the off-road controls, instead of in an awkward binnacle up top. Looking down through those, you've got a couple different drive modes now, as well as descent and speed controls, which basically serve as off-road cruise control that let you crawl at down to 1 kilometer an hour. If I switch that on right here, well, boop. I'm going to put my cameras on so that I can see my clearance. We have a very classically Toyota out-of-date low-resolution camera view here, but it does the job. Now I can use this knob to control my speed. I'm not holding the pedals at all as I crawl down this. I'm just letting it do its thing and manage everything. Right now, still in high range, I'm cruising down at 3 kilometers an hour, and if I choose, I can release it to go faster, up to 30. If you bring it down into low range and do this though, you've got 1 kilometer an hour, even half kilometer an hour increments. That's really helpful and really reassuring when you're getting through the scary stuff. Also handy are, of course, your classic inclinometers, which I've got here on the dash, showing that I was about 20 degrees sideways there, which is a little bit nerve-wracking, but we do feel relatively secure. Now, as I come to obstacles like this, I can see already that I'm going to clear them, but I can also still, as before, switch to mirror down camera views that give me a very clear view that I am indeed clear and that I'm not going to mess up my unprotected sills. Now, if you get into scarier stuff, we've got the usual, which is a locking differential out back. We don't have a locking front, although of course we do have modern stuff that uses braking to keep the traction in check. Now, as I make my way up something like this, I might be tempted, but of course you want to save that for when you're actually in trouble. That's a last resort to get you out. And if I really wanted, I could even switch it into low range right here, just for a little bit of extra reassurance. But after you're done throwing your rooster tails, you are left just to think about what you've been enjoying. And that's very much where I'm at today. You see, there's so much in here that is so exciting. As a nerd, that new frame is awesome. That is so friggin' cool. I know, it's just some extra steel, but guys! And then we get to appreciating some of the intricacies that facilitated some of that hoppity-skippity over all of those dunes and moguls, because here, well, those Fox setup, they aren't just the same old, same old. No, they're 2.5-inch internal bypass. Up front, they're McPherson style. Out back, they just manage the outer ends while inboard springs actually suspend the axle there. It's a 5-link rear. Anyway, what matters is that for the rear end, they are augmented by external reservoirs. Now, what does that mean? Because we talk about this a lot, or at least in vehicles that get them. External reservoirs are important because they increase the amount of fluid that a damper can carry. That means that there's more fluid to distribute the thermal load in as it starts to work really hard when you're abusing it, smacking over those sorts of moguls. Why don't we have externals up front? Well, that's because of what I talked about earlier with the reduction in unsprung mass. Thanks to those aluminum components in particular, in addition to just generally independent suspension being lighter, they don't have quite as much load to manage as it rebounds down under that spring force. Out back though, still having such a big beefy solid axle, that's a lot of mass that those fellas have to take care of. So they get externals, and good. I don't want to pay extra for more externals if I don't necessarily need them. And really, this is not an outright Raptor. Yeah, it's running 33s, but this is not necessarily meant to go all out, balls out, silly TRX smash and all of that. You can do a lot in here, but this is still a truck for adults, and it's proportioned as such. Are there things that leave me wanting? Well, yeah, it would be nice to have a proper locking front diff there. Just completion's sake, you know? I'm also not necessarily keen on just the overall size of this thing. It has grown, as have the Tacomas, and yeah, it carries that weight well. It drives like a much lighter car than it did in the past, despite being some 1,000 pounds heavier, especially thanks to that battery pack in the back. But it's still a big vehicle. Now, I had the Tundra TRD Pro through this same trail 2 weeks ago, and this is definitely fitting through a lot of tight spots a lot better than that Tundra did. But it's still got a hulking presence, especially when I compare it to something like my little Lada Niva 4x4. Also unfortunate is just that you're a little bit compromised when it comes to the cabin storage and cargo experience. Because these trucks are also hybrid now, they've got to fit that hybrid battery somewhere. Now, the hybrid battery is just a nickel metal hydride. It's not lithium ion. That means that it doesn't have quite the same energy density, and so it's kind of big. They've put it underneath the trunk floor here, as in the Sequoia. That means that there isn't room for a third row, which is fine in the TRD. You don't necessarily need a 7-seater in this exact model. But it does mean that the floor is overall about this much higher up. Now, third row, whatever, not many people are actually using those in something like this. But it is important because it means that the trunk floor is actually about this much higher than the bumper level. If you're planning your second date move-in, well, you're not gonna get a whole lot of furniture in this thing in each load. Fold that middle row down, and they don't necessarily actually make a great cargo floor either, because that middle row, well, it's not flat. They lean forward a little bit. You can flip those forward further or remove them altogether, and underneath the seat, there are little panels that you can pop out and cover over those latch points on the floor, but it's still not an optimal cargo loadout. Improved, however, is the general seated position. They've gotten rid of that really squat, weird sedan, almost sports car-like, flat, high-floored setup from the previous generations. That means that when you get into this, it just sits normally. This is less perhaps a positive or brownie point then, as it is the absence of an old negative, or at least a common complaint. I personally never minded that seated position because I recognize what it afforded in off-road ability and that higher floor, that better clearance. Still, I gotta hand it to those who are actually living with these things all the time there. What else do I wish? Well, honestly, I wish that you didn't have to go hybrid to get the TRD Pro. Yes, it's a great setup and the power feels awesome. I love the torque, the arrival, the delivery. It's a fabulous powertrain to run. And that base powertrain is not as throaty. But I don't necessarily like that you are forced into it with no option to get into the serious off-roady stuff from a lower price point. I can understand the business case for why they've done this. Make no mistake, they've got to make their margins on these things, whatever. Still, if you want gas only, or if you don't want to spend the extra $13,000 to make that step into the hybrids, well, your ceiling is going to be the TRD off-road. Now, if you are just looking for the value pack, that is a pretty solid way to go still. That gets you upgraded Bilstein dampers. They aren't quite as aggressive, obviously, as these big 2.5-incher Foxes with the external reservoir out back, but they do the job a little more commendably than that base road-going setup that you're going to see in an SR5 or a Limited. Tires and other options are not going to be as exciting down there in the TRD off-road, but overall and just averaged out, that is really the sensible value pick, and especially if you're someone who is planning on building something out yourself. Bear in mind, of course, that modern vehicles do not build out quite in the same way as old vehicles, and if you're looking at moving into this from a 90s 4Runner, well, it's a little bit more intricate, as you probably guessed. Even just doing some bigger wheels than it delivers with, well, yeah, you're gonna have to deal with computer stuff to actually get that to read it properly, because we've got an all-digital cabin here. Now, the standard is 7 inches for the digital cluster. This here in the higher trim is a 12.3. You've also got a standard 8-inch center display, but in this case, we've got the big 14. Personally, I would actually prefer the smaller 8-inch because you get the same infotainment experience in it. And honestly, Toyota's system is pretty straightforward. It's pretty simple, and you don't need a whole ton of it. Wireless Android Auto and Apple CarPlay are standard, although in lower trims you will have to manually option in the wireless charger down here if you so desire. Cabin storage around this, well, it's pretty solid. The texture of the plastics around here are a little bit Rubbermaid, but they accommodate a lot. Here in the door, I'm carrying my emotional support carrots, a banana, my sunscreen, and some hummus because this is a carabiner coated car and that seemed like an appropriate snack for today's shoot. Down here in the center, we've got another deep pocket that I can throw my Leatherman into or whatever else. And the rear passengers also get some really handy cubbies in the doors, as well as really good, deep, solid door-mounted cup holders. This center armrest, though, does not afford a whole lot of stowage space, and that is a bit disappointing. I've got it pretty packed full of all the things that I didn't want cluttering the scene on camera here, and it fits it, albeit not all that happily. Still, it's enough that I've got several types of batteries charging at the same time in here, all powered from the 120 volt outlet that's right here in the back. There's another one of those, some 2400 watts, that's mounted in the boot there if you so need. And if you're out camping, it's a nice accessible spot with lights mounted in the tailgate that shine down on you from overhead. And if you're playing the stereo, you get speakers projecting from back there too. It's a really nice spot to set up a table beside if you're choosing to make your lunch or whatever else. Now, on audio, the TRD Pro gets the upgraded 14 speaker sound system. And it's not amazing, it's more just like that seated position thing where it's not bad. The bass systems in these are fine, they count as stereos, but they don't exactly inspire much. This upgrade, well, yeah, it's got a sub, but it's not all that impressive in range. It's got some reasonable capacity for volume, but in fairness, that's not really what you're buying this for. Though it is a much quieter and more refined truck than ever before, this isn't exactly a hi-fi listener's paradise. Now, something silly in here that I and many other journos have laughed at, but I've actually come around on, is the little speaker up there in the dash. Now, I still have some anxieties about that thing with its little lithium battery as well, just cooking in the sun for 15 years, but it is kind of neat that it fits this little JBL Bluetooth speaker as part of the vehicle stereo system. When it's docked, as usual, it just serves as a little, 40-watt center channel up there by the windscreen. That's a good balance for those two tweeters there in the A-pillars. Pop it out, as I did today during my B-roll shooting, and you can just Bluetooth it to your phone and play music for entertainment while you've got the car off and you're doing other things. It's such a silly, silly little gimmick, but it is one that I used and enjoyed today, and I gotta give them credit for that. Is this where I'd put my modern off-roading money then? Well, that's a hard call. You see, my heart really of the modern spat of off-roaders is with the Ineos Grenadier. But if you want to get that in the Trial Master off-road equipped and ready trim, that thing comes in from $105K. Granted, that's only $20,000 more than this, and that's a vehicle that gets a pretty solidly proven BMW powertrain, as well as solid axles front and rear with a whole pile of links that make it handle with a lot of refinement that you wouldn't expect. The Grenadier does not drive like a Jeep Wrangler or indeed like a classic Defender. It's composed, it's still traditional with its recirculating ball steering, but it's a really, really refreshingly classic, traditional, and yet still modern, usable, and accessible vehicle. Returning to the mainstream, you've got the usual. You've got your Ford Bronco and your Jeep Wrangler. Now, we've compared those lots, and really the TLDR there is that if you're going to be doing mostly road stuff, the Bronco is a little bit easier to live with thanks to its independent front suspension like this thing, but the Wrangler is sort of the hardier rough and tumble. Of those, you're going to be looking at $70,000 to $80,000 for a comparable off-road trim to this here TRD Pro. And really, this feels like the more sensible, long-term minded buy. Then of course there is the new Toyota Land Cruiser that we've tested before. That vehicle is not actually meant to be the brand's serious off-roader. This is, and the Tacoma. The Land Cruiser instead is based on the world market Land Cruiser Prado, which is the sort of baby brother to the proper J70 heavy-duty Land Cruiser that's still available in some other markets with less stringent safety regulations. Now, that new Land Cruiser is a little bit more spacious to be inside. It's a different configuration. It feels a little bit more modern in certain ways. But it's ultimately meant to be just a family cruiser, a tourer of a big 4x. You can still definitely do plenty in the Land Cruiser, but if you're really planning on getting gnarly, this is where you're going to want to put your money. The last, of course, is the modern Land Rover Defender, particularly the 110. You can get into one of those from the 80s, and it's about $1,600 for the off-road pack in that, and then another $1,600 if you want to get the air suspension on top of that. Now, those are plenty capable rigs, but you are going to have to option them up from that $80-some-odd thousand price tag, and it's just a little bit posh. It's not exactly what you think of when you think of someone who's actually earnestly beating the trails. That said, the Defender is fully independent suspension all around, unlike any of those competitors, and it makes for a much easier ride to live with day in and day out, and especially on your highway commute. It may not be one of our beloved rigs of old, but this new 4Runner, 1,000 pounds heavier, hybrid now, all of that, still definitely brings something very worthwhile to the off-road game. It comes at a rich price, but then again, so too have all of the TRD Pros. This is a premium and indeed aspirational halo product for many 4x4 buyers within the Toyota family. At $82,000 or so before you get into tax and everything, this is a steep buy. And if you go even higher for the Trail Hunter, well, you are making a big spend. But all told, and especially given that that's often just what big serious SUVs cost nowadays, I'm quite happy with what Toyota has delivered here. It's easy for me to be cynical about things that break from tradition, from the cherished analog drive experiences that I've always loved. But I have to grant that this does what it does with surprising elegance. Toyota, for all its conservatism, its often slow reaction to things, its adherence to some older technologies like those crappy cameras, they still ultimately come together into something that really earns its keep, and I think really will cement itself in this next generation of off-roading. Would I choose this over a 5th gen? Well, it's hard to say because honestly, I wouldn't take a 5th gen either. I would take a J70 like any sensible Toyota off-road fan would do. Of course, Toyota won't let us do that. With that then, it does bring a worthwhile bit of modernity. This is a very different experience, but if you are someone who outgrew 4Runners in the past because they were so coarse and unsophisticated, but who still finds things like the Defender a little bit posh, maybe even distasteful, well, this could be a very solid path for you. It's still something that you definitely want to drive yourself and actually get a taste for, because the noise of that TRD exhaust and some of the configurations, well, they are a little bit different from what you might be used to in other vehicles. You may also have some issue with those interior plastics feeling as Rubbermaid as they do. Otherwise, though, it is something that's very solidly assembled, that fits a phenomenal frame underneath, and that brings that power. Hybrid tech may not give you a whole lot of economy gains here, but it does definitely make this thing drive, cruise on the highway, and tackle terrain like no 4Runner ever before. For Driving.ca, I'm Al Alder. For more off-road news, reviews, tests, specs, previews, all the rest, be sure to follow us online on Driving.ca.